piloting or tracking some of the initiatives at the field level on Nexus already, and looking at developments where there are country development plans. It used to be the UNDAF. It used to be the UN Development Framework. It's called something else now, but it's the UN country framework. And so, we're trying to look at where in country are there already initiatives and efforts happening to mainstream gender and to also include the humanitarian dimension. So, watch that space, and of course, we'll keep you updated on how that develops. So, that's just to give you a little bit of a snapshot in terms of some of the developments at the global level. There's also lots more, but that's just to get us started. Now, some of these we will touch again when we talk about the Gender Action Plan, and Tony will be taking us forward on that. But if you haven't already seen, I also wanted to highlight that there's also quite a lot of traction when it comes to GBV and how OCHA is prioritizing that. And in particular, we currently have a GBV page on the FTS website, and that is meant to give more visibility to GBV in terms of the funding for GBV and the gaps for GBV. So that's a very exciting development. So I'm going to turn it over to Tony now to take us through the Gender Action Plan, and hopefully this will also generate a bit more discussion on this. Tony, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. And thanks for the overview on the updates that we have at the global level on Gender April. I think that's really useful in framing our conversation on what are things that we can do to feed into those commitments, into those objectives and the work that we do every day. So everyone just give me one moment. I'm just going to put up my presentation as we talk about the Gender Action Plan and what are some of the concrete examples. Screen share. Okay, please let me know if you can see my screen. Okay, let me just go into slideshow. Okay, you can see it. All right, so in this item, we're going to discuss the new Gender Action Plan, and I wanted to first discuss looking at what are some of the ways in what is OCHA's role in advancing gender equality, just for us to all be on the same page of that, discuss the newly updated policy instruction and the finalization of our Gender Action Plan. I'm going to give some concrete examples that are within the Gender Action Plan, and also share some examples from the field where offices are already making great traction in putting into implementation great ways of looking at advancing our objectives in gender equality. And then lastly, thinking about the planning and the role that we have as gender focal points in our duty stations to support our offices in really being familiarized with the policy and taking on our contextualized action plans. So as we know, as OCHA, we have a unique role in being the ones mandated as the convener of humanitarian actors. So this provides us the opportunity to really take forward our three main objectives, which is firstly to drive robust gender analysis in the HPC and other strategic emergency responses, right? Because not every country that we have presence is a HRP country, but we have other types of strategic frameworks that we feed into and emergency plans that we support. So we are able to support gender analysis and promote it in those spaces as well. Secondly, is for us to prioritize the prevention and response and mitigation of GBV. And our third priority is to promote women and women-led organizations in their participation and leadership in humanitarian decision-making. So these are the three main objectives that we have in gender equality for OCHA. And this is what is richly represented through the new policy update. And in our concrete examples of how we can do that together as an entity in our gender action plan. And just quickly to think about how was the process conducted for the gender policy instruction. It was a very consultative process where our partners, our UN partners, our international organizations and other entities and members, stakeholders were able to support in seeing what did we have in our older gender policy, are ways that we can advance it to be more relevant to the environment that we see now and the needs in humanitarian action, and what are some of the ways that we could better support in a realistic way the way that humanitarian action can represent and promote gender equality. So we were able to do that over a span of a few months of really engaging with different stakeholders to make sure that the policy that was developed speaks to the needs on the ground. And the policy reflects a number of the different developments and commitments that we have in the UN system. So thinking about across the board, the different commitments that we have with Oslo, the commitments that we have with call to action, we wanted to ensure that we were harmonizing the key objectives that we had in other spaces, and then it spoke to our entity gender policy instruction. And what's new with the policy instruction is that we had the accompanying gender action plan, which was something that I think it really came out of the consultative process, that everyone said there needs to be a way that we can track and monitor how we're taking our policy, our theory, our ideas into action. So that's what came about in really birthing the gender action plan. And lastly, a new development that's a part of the new gender policy instruction is the creation of the gender board, which consists of senior managers that have the oversight of the implementation. So that gives us a level of accountability to ensure that we not only agree to this gender policy, but that we're actually making traction and keeping our word when it comes to the objectives we say that we will undertake. So yeah, these are exciting elements in the gender policy instruction, which all of you have shared. Not only did our former USG share it throughout OCHA, but also April has shared it with us with the Gender Action Plan as background materials for this meeting. So what's new, what's different about the gender policy? So for us, we think that the policy shows that there's more transformative ways of looking at gender and the ways that we can support it. We wanted to ensure that it's also more intersectional in the way that we are approaching this human rights-based approach. And not only that, we're looking at women and girls, but women and girls in all their diversity across contexts and across emergencies. We wanted to be able to also highlight specifically the need for us to prioritize gender-based violence prevention and mitigation in the ways that OCHA, not the lead agency in GBV, but how we can be a lead actor in ensuring that we are coordinating the response, humanitarian actors' response and coordination around GBV. What's also different is that we have focused priorities. We wanted to take away the kind of vagueness around, does OCHA do gender? Are we supposed to do gender? Is that in our mandate? Take away the murkiness and make it very clear that there are three main objectives that we can prioritize our work around and have the clarity that, yes, it is OCHA's business to take on gender equality and prevention of gender-based violence. And another thing that is really highlighted in this new gender policy instruction is the spirit of collective responsibility, that it's not only the role of, let's say, gender focal points or the gender unit to to have the responsibility to push forward gender equality in not only our entity, but across the system, but it's everyone's role in OCHA. We all have a specific path to support the overall goal of gender equality, and also highlighting how and why and what that looks like for each section, for each department of OCHA is something that has been added to this policy in a way that didn't exist before. And then the last element that is new and a bit different in this policy instruction is the strength and accountability aspect when it comes to having the senior gender board to really be able to track and monitor and engage in the review of our implementation, and the gender action plan that can give us a guide in what we commit to do and how we commit to do it. So these are the key elements that make the new gender policy instruction new and different. And please feel free to stop me if you would like to ask any questions as I'm presenting. So I wanted to give some examples that are specifically in the Gender Action Plan, right? Because we say that the Gender Action Plan gives concrete examples of how we can put into practice the gender policy instruction. And looking at priority 1, which is drive robust gender analysis, I wanted to give the excerpt of what is some of the type of activities, indicators, roles that the coordination HPC colleagues have under gender analysis. And so if you had the opportunity to already look at the Gender Action Plan, you will see that it breaks down for each section particular activities that they can undertake that shows that they are supporting and contributing to gender equality for OCHA. So the first example is from coordination, and the output that we have here for gender analysis for coordination is that a gender responsive HPC generates gender responsive information and planning products such as the H&O, flash appeals, and humanitarian response plans. So that's our output. That's what we can do. We can ensure that the HPC documents are more gender responsive. So now thinking about what are the activities? Because a lot of the times we say we need a gender responsive HPC document process, but then colleagues might not understand what that means, what that looks like. So we gave 2 examples of what that would mean to have a more gender responsive HPC. And the first example is that we would ensure that our HPC products contain adequate sex and age disaggregated data and gender analysis. So that's one concrete activity. If our coordination colleagues are wondering, how are we checking to see that we are doing gender responsive HPC? Okay, let's think about where is sex and age disaggregated data. Let's think about how we are pooling gender analysis to inform our overall overview of the needs, the challenges, and the kind of response that's needed. So that's the first kind of activity that can be taken on. The second activity that we highlighted that's possible to help with this output is supporting the establishment and running of gender and humanitarian action groups where relevant and utilize expertise for gender analysis. So this is ensuring that you have gender-focused coordination groups that are engaged in the process, right? They're not just on the sideline, not being a part of the HPC coordination and creation of products, but they're engaged, they're participating, and also utilizing the type of gender technical expertise that exists in country, or even reaching out to your regional technical support that exists. To ensure that they are glued in and cued into the HPC process and able to provide advice and guidance, ensuring that there is adequate gender representation and visibility in our humanitarian products. So these are 2 very concrete examples that our coordination colleagues, our HPC colleagues can consider when they think, okay, it's HPC time. What are we doing on gender? What do we need to do? And then moving to the next column, is looking at targets and indicators. So what's really helpful within the Gender Action Plan is that we give ourselves specific targets for how do we measure how much work that we're doing towards our outputs and our activities. And the one that we have here for gender analysis for coordination is 100% of H&Os include sex and age segregated data and gender analysis. So that's our target. And ensuring that there's an annual increase in the percentage of indicators in the HRP monitoring framework that are sex and age desegregated. So this is key. This is key in the sense that not only do we know what we want to do, how we should do it with the activities that should be linked with it, but what we're reaching for in our actual products quantitatively. So thinking that if we know that all our H&Os should have sex and age segregated data, all of our H&Os should be informed by a robust gender analysis, then we know that these are elements within the process that should be included if it's absent at this moment. So it gives us clear guidance on what that looks like and what we're looking for better gender inclusion in the HPC cycle. And then lastly, the column that I think is very useful is it says who's relevant in taking on this role. Where are the responsibility to be had in taking these activities forward? And it states that it's a number of people, right? So it's not just the gender focal point or the gender unit. There are specific tasks that are related to a number of different staff roles and making sure that this is able to happen. So it's all the relevant staff in our country and regional offices. It includes our coordination division. It includes specifically APMB, right? And it also includes OAD. And just note that even if the gender unit is not added specifically in the role of being responsible for that particular output activity, we're always here to support and engage, definitely to ensure that all of the challenges that might exist, that we're able to provide guidance on this. So this is the example for priority 1. In priority 2, which focuses on looking at prioritizing GBV in the prevention, response, and mitigation, I took the example that we have for our colleagues in advocacy, IM, and communication. So within this output for these colleagues for GBV, you see that it says that HCs, including HC compacts, HCTs, and intercluster coordination group advocacy briefs, and messaging include gender and GBV. So this is what we want to see. We want to be able to see that there are clear messaging in our advocacy, communication briefings, in all of our clear communication briefings and messaging, that there are language about our objectives, about our priorities, about what we're doing on gender and GBV to ensure that we're not just leaving out gender in these important briefings and communication materials, that they need to be present. And so how do we do that? How our advocacy colleagues to be able to make this happen? We provide 2 examples here as well, is that we should promote meaningful participation, leadership, and decision-making through advocacy and messaging on gender equality. And then also that we should disseminate information and promote the implementation of the gender policy, the gender handbook, the GAM, give visibility to these tools that we have, these frameworks that we have that show our position and our commitment to gender equality. And also compiling and sharing our annual report and progress with HCs and HCTs and other relevant stakeholders, including donors. So not only keeping this to ourselves, a lot of the times we have such great communication material that comes from SCB, that comes from our IIM colleagues, but it kind of stays in-house, right? A lot of the times we have these materials, we have these products, but we're not doing a great job in disseminating them widely so that it's clear across the system, across the sector, what is OCHA's commitments, priorities, and what the work that we've been doing, what our progress has been in really promoting and driving gender equality. So with this activity, this is a clear-cut way that we can ensure that we are adequately informing our stakeholders and our partners on the different elements of the work that we're doing on gender equality, and also allowing them to see the different tools and materials that they themselves can utilize to be in line with the IEC commitments and the sector commitments in reality on gender equality. And so just looking at the targets and indicators for this, we have here that by the end of 2020, OCHA will compile and share good practices on women's meaningful participation. So this is something that will be able to inform, right, our activities, inform the type of information, the content that we're able to provide to our advocacy, our IM and communication colleagues, that you have a breadth of different information that you can utilize. Given if you're talking about food insecurity in the Sahel, it would be great if advocacy colleagues had key messaging specifically on the gender dimensions of food insecurity in the Sahel that we could provide, so they can ensure that that's something that's going to be put in all of their advocacy briefings, in all of their communication products that they have on hand to engage. So the responsibility for this particular output, the activity and the targets, is the Gender Unit, OAD, and the Gender Focal Points Network. So we can really work together collectively to ensure that these good practices, these key messages, highlighting women's meaningful participation is something that's already created and our colleagues are able to utilize them. Yeah, I just think that's a great, a great output to have, especially in the way that it can guide our communications moving forward. And just for the last priority that we have, which is looking at promoting women's meaningful participation in humanitarian decision-making, I have taken the example that we have for our policy colleagues. And looking here, we see that the output is protection of civilians work streams that reflect gender equality, women, peace and security, and humanitarian action. So knowing that not only does OCHA have the mandate for humanitarian coordination, we also have a particular protection mandate, which is specific to protection of civilians. And this protection of civilians mandate includes gender equality and women, peace and security in meaningful linkages in meaningful ways. And what we have highlighted through the consultative process, through a review of the work that we've undertaken under protection, is seeing that there has been a dearth in our engagement and reflection of women, peace and security and gender equality, for example, in protection of civilians. So we would like to ensure that moving forward, we have adequate representation and visibility in this work stream, particular to gender. And the type of activities that we think that can help us in this goal, the first is ensuring that OCHA-led briefings include Security Council briefings that contain messaging on GBV as they're relevant, given the thematic focus, the geographic focus, what have you. And this is something that it can easily be included, right? If we're doing a Security Council briefing that's happening today on Yemen, for example, we should have key messaging on women's leadership, women's participation in humanitarian decision-making in Yemen. That humanitarian crisis has so much work where women are leading the response for their communities, where women are working on ensuring that they are a part of the different aspects of peace and security. So are we highlighting that in our OCHA-led briefings on Yemen, just as an example? Are we taking the opportunity to do that in all of our briefings? And at times, messages on gender and on GBV and on women's meaningful participation are just not present. And then if we look at the next aspect is the next activity is facilitating the inclusion of gender equality and GBV as a priority theme in high-level events, including the ECOSOC Haas, the General Assembly, and the high-level panel on displacement. So this is another example of how our policy colleagues can ensure that there is visibility and promotion of gender equality and prevention and response of GBV by ensuring that our high-level events, that we have opportunities to ensure that there are key messaging and themes about gender, about GBV. We shouldn't pass an opportunity like the week of POC, where there's nothing on gender, there's nothing on women, peace and security, there's nothing on GBV. We need to ensure that we are strategically planning every year for these high-level events to ensure that there is visibility. And not only because it reflects well on our priorities and objectives as an entity, as OCHA, but then when we don't have it, it also sends a not so good message to the system as a whole, right? That in these high-level events, in protection of civilians, OCHA doesn't see the need to promote gender equality. So that's what's being resonated with our partners, with the system when there is a lack of that. So these two activities we think would be very important to utilize and to have for our policy colleagues, especially when it comes to protection of civilians. And we have two targets specifically for this. And the first target is by 2021. Oh, it's this year. 30% of our briefings should contain gender and GBV, and by 2022, 40%. And so you see that you can see the trend here that we're incrementally increasing the percentage of briefings that contain gender and GBV. So it gives us some time to get there, right? And then the second target that we have is that OCHA is a partner in at least one side event on gender or GBV. So I think this is also a type of indicator that we can easily meet and also continue to incrementally increase. And then you see, just lastly, in the last column, who's responsible for taking forward this activity, this output. So we have OAD, we have PRMB, and we have a gender unit for this. So this is just quickly to give you an example of the 3 different priority areas that are in the Gender Action Plan, and the ways that it's broken down to give concrete examples of activities that we can do, of indicators that we can take on, that we can measure our successfulness in reaching that output. And it gives us examples of how we can do it. And what's really great about it is that this is our guide to help us, but also we can contextualize aspects of the Gender Action Plan, of the activities that meet the kind of relevant work that we're doing in our respective fields. So utilizing this as a template that can help us to get a bit more specific on the kind of policy work that we're doing at the country level, the kind of HPC work, the kind of advocacy work that we're doing there. And so we're really in an exciting opportunity, an exciting time where we're able to create the kind of gender action plans that will speak to our policy instruction and speak to this gender action plan. And now I just want to give some examples from the field that already show ongoing efforts to advance gender equality that's already happening, that are really in line with our new policy and the Gender Action Plan. The first example is from the Jordan office. When they were working on their gender-specific activities, they have created this indicator or this particular activity where system-wide minimum financial targets for gender allocation and sector projects under the Jordan Response Plan, 15% of all those projects will be GAM scored projects with a 3 or a 4. So this is the first kind of even target and benchmark that that we've seen that an office has taken on their own. Because even at the global level, even with CERF, with CBPF, we don't have particular gender benchmarks for financing. So it's a great novel idea to see that Jordan is spearheading this and having a particular financial target for gender allocations in the Jordan Response Plan. So that's exciting to see. And then looking at Central African Republic, they've developed a comprehensive gender profile that provides gender analysis for humanitarian planning. And as well, they're supporting the Gender and Humanitarian Working Group in their country. So there's a lot of great things, a lot of great elements of gender equality coming out of the CAR office. And then to give two regional examples, the LAC office continued to support and amplify the regional Red LAC network in gender analysis and coordination, where OCHA is co-chairing that network. So that gives a great opportunity for us to not only provide information on the work that we're doing on gender equality, but also to work directly with our stakeholders that are focusing on gender and being able to amplify their challenges, their priorities, and have that inform the regional response in a meaningful way. In the ROAB office, we see that we're co-leading the Regional Gender and Humanitarian Action Working Group. And in that way, we're ensuring that there is gender expertise that is engaged in our humanitarian planning. And we always get such great examples of gender analysis and engagement of women-led organizations from ROAP. And I think it really speaks to how active and how engaged that regional GIHA is. So just lastly, thinking about the plan moving forward, how do we do our gender action plans? How do we roll this out? What is going to be the process? What are things that need to be taken on? The new policy and the new gender action plan needs to be rolled out across all the fields as a key priority with the support of our heads and deputy heads of offices and our gender focal points. And what we're looking from our deputy heads, from our heads, from our GFPs, is to ensure that OCHA staff know what our commitments on gender equality are, know their role in supporting the advancement of the agenda, are aware of the specific and concrete ways that we continue to make a difference for gender equality in humanitarian settings, support in the creation of our contextualized gender action plans, and also ensuring that we're utilizing the gender technical expertise that exists in country, in the region. Our working groups are collaborative and engaged in our processes, and that we're supporting this. And then lastly, and we're always going to highlight this, we want to make sure that in each of our offices that the OCHA Gender Focal Points are engaged and they are, taking on aspects of supporting the overall familiarization of the entity and our colleagues with the policy and the action plan. So these are the key elements of how we see taking forward the familiarization of OCHA staff with the policy instruction and the accompanying plan. So thank you. We've reached the end of our presentation and looking forward to any of your comments, your questions on what we have for the Gender Action Plan.
Any reactions? No questions?
Can I come in, April?
Yes, please, Mari. Sorry, who's that?
Madhumita.
Madhumita, yes, please, Madhu, go ahead.
I found the action plan really, really very good. Yeah, and I was thinking that looking at your highlighted actions, especially those which you have prioritized for 2022, how we could look at in putting those activities, outputs, actions into the work plans of the working groups. Those who have gender focal point working group, or for example, in Somalia, I have the inclusion focal group. Instead of trying to break my head and trying to think what planning I should do, annual work plan I should create for them, I think the best way to move forward would be to take these elements and put it in their work plan so that this gets done automatically in the country office. That is my plan.
Great suggestion. Absolutely. I think when Tony was having this discussion with some of the country officers and also with some of our gender focal points, there was the suggestion of, having some of these elements integrated into a gender action plan for the office, but also integrating it into existing work plans of working groups, but also, for the country teams themselves. So I think that's, I think whatever ways that we can find to integrate some of these elements and to take them forward, that's what we want to do. And we also want to mobilize on existing efforts at the field level. So if there's already a mechanism in place that is looking at how we do better gender mainstreaming, especially if it's through a gender working group or the GIHA groups, then I think some of these benchmarks should resonate with the benchmarks or the priorities of those groups. I think a few other people have their hands up, but I can't read them. Tony, can you see? It's Mari from, I think, Myanmar and Maria.
Yes, sorry. Okay, I see. Yes, Mari, go ahead. And then we have Eriam, and then we have Maria. Go ahead, Mari.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this briefing. It's super useful. And when I received the policy, I was thinking, oh, I should really take the opportunity to brief the colleagues. But I also was I wanted to familiarize myself, and it's a useful session. So it's good to know that the gender action plan doesn't have to be something that is solely for OCHA, so it can be integrated into existing gender-related work streams. So I think I'll work with the GIHA workstream to do that. And so do you suggest that we hold sort of like a session with staff to familiarize themselves with the policy? And in that case, it'd be useful to have maybe these slides and if you have any other material that can be used for the briefing, that we could all use across the board so we don't have to replicate or anything, that would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Sure. If I can just come in to say, Tony's been doing a great job in terms of supporting some of our country officers with exactly this. So we, working with the gender focal points, of course, but doing these briefings in more detail so that our colleagues across the board understand, what they can do in their functions to really take forward some of these elements. And then in response to your point around integrating this into, the work plan of the GIHAs, absolutely. While this is OCHA's plan, if it can support a collective plan, then that's great. But we don't want to, we don't want to be imposing this as, now you all have to take on, OCHA's gender action plan. But surely the priorities that we have set is to help the collective agenda. And so whatever priorities we have should also resonate with the working group, the GIHA that you're working with. So definitely, I think, sharing that, here are some of our priority areas. This is what we're aiming to do. Is this something that, the GIHA can collectively support? And then, working out how to do that. I think it's just important that people don't feel that we are imposing our action plan on them. But that our action plan is in support of the GIHA work plan and in support of other people's, work plans in country. That's all. But I think it's great if there is synergy of obviously.
Thank you, Mari. And now we see Eriam. Eriam, go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much, Tony and April, for the presentations and the discussions. Actually, my deputy head of office, Elena, is the one who leads as the gender focal points, but I am supporting her. I just have one question related to something you presented in the for the first priority. In the example you showed about having better sex and age disaggregated data and gender analysis. For us in Lebanon, we are currently in a process of developing our first, I'll say, emergency response plan. I'll say the only close example or experience we've had to developing something like this is the flash appeal in the last year's Beirut port explosion response. So we would be grateful if we could have sort of like good examples of HRPs, where this integration or incorporation of gender equality, gender analysis, sex and age disaggregated data, if we could have access to some of the good examples, I think it will help us a lot, because we are currently in the process of developing our first emergency response plan. So that's just something I wanted to flag. Thank you very much.
Yes, Adam, thank you so much for your comment, for your question, and definitely we can share with you examples of what we think to be robust and good gender analysis in emergency plans. Also, what I think would be useful, just because I know the Lebanon environment pretty well, I used to be there. I'm just thinking about how, as an example of how you can utilize the existing country technical gender expertise there, is that if you think about the colleagues that we have with UN Women who are very active in Lebanon, and also the UNCT Gender Network that has all of just a breadth of different gender technical expertise at the senior level, I think they would be happy to be engaged and to participate in supporting OCHA in doing the emergency response plan. And as the gender unit, we'd be happy to make introductions with UN Women country team in Lebanon to help with that process, because it's another key example of what we think might be very useful in helping field officers is engaging with the existing gender technical expertise on the ground, because that is just a rich environment of supporting you, especially as you bring on this new emergency planning. And Maddie, thank you so much. That would be great if you can share that new emergency response plan, not only with Ediam, but share it with us. We would love to have great examples of gender analysis and PSCA represented in emergency response plans as we compile best examples that we're able to not only share with us in the gender focal points, but to share across the OCHA system. So yes, please share.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm on mute. And I see Maria. Maria, your hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Tony. Good evening from this side to all colleagues. I think RUAP, we were able to benefit from the support of the gender unit at HQ level when the new gender policy came out. And we also went ahead after the briefing with you. That was very helpful, Tony. We went ahead and then made use of the expertise within the GIA, specifically UN Women, to give us a refresher on gender analysis and, the gender and age marker, which was participated in by different country offices and hats within the region. I think that was very useful, especially at the onset of the next HPC cycle. And there are lots of responses, not necessarily HPC, but response plans that are being developed across the region. So this is one experience that I would like to share, that we are utilizing the expertise within the GIA to sensitize other partners, our own staff, on the different gender tools to be used in planning purposes. So just want to share that. And thank you very much for your support from your team. Over.
We're so I'm actually really happy that you were able to make contact with UN Women. They were able to support you with the refresher on the GAM just in time for the planning cycle. I think that's great. Perfect. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat here. I see a comment from Rania. Kindly a follow-up question. So country office can, based on your template, develop their own working plans. Oh, I see. And April just responded. I am not reading quick enough. Yes, exactly. If you want to develop a country-specific action plan to implement, you can do that.
Everyone, and thank you so much, Tony. A question, please. Can you just give us a few key milestones, or let's say guidance on how to develop the work plan? I mean, what steps? Should we sit with the sectors? Should we sit with the units? What do you expect us to do? Thank you so much.
Would you like, April, would you like me to respond, or would you like to respond?
I can start. You know, so again, this is OCHA's Gender Action Plan, right? This is how we want to implement our gender policy and the priorities set out in that gender policy. So whatever means that we have to, you know, to reach these targets, whether that's advocacy and engagement, you know, with the clusters, then yes, but utilize it as a first point of, you know, our first step should be familiarizing across OCHA teams, because this is really our business, right? We are saying we have 3 priorities at a corporate level for OCHA. It is, how do we get more robust gender analysis in the operations that we work in? It is, how do we prioritize or to make sure that GBV is prioritized? And then the third element is, you know, how do we increase women's participation in decision making, right? So these are the corporate priorities that OCHA has set. So how do we now implement it in our operations? And so the Gender Action Plan is a, you know, is a guide to say, okay, here are some benchmarks. Here are some things that we think, you know, coordination colleagues should do, pool funds colleagues should do, comms. Here are some of your benchmarks. Now, if you want to do that on your own in terms of brainstorming with, you know, your various teams to make this happen, fine. If you want to brainstorm with comms colleagues across the UN system in country, fine too. But I think some of those strategies need to be developed and driven by OCHA, because this is our own action plan. And so going back to the first point that I made is, you know, when we engage with our partners, we don't want to be saying, hey, here's our action plan, and now you need to implement it. That's not how it should, that's not how people should receive the message. People should receive the message that, hey, OCHA is prioritizing gender. I have a gender action plan. Is there, you know, some way that we can collaborate to get to the same outcome, right? Because our outcome should also be their outcome. It's a collective outcome. We're wanting to make humanitarian action more responsive, you know, to women and girls and men and boys. So how do we work together to do that? And so I just want to be very, you know, I just don't want for us to misrepresent that this is an action plan for the system. This is our own action plan as OCHA. How do we help the system become more gender responsive through the actions that we take? And so, you know, I think the first step is making sure that our officers have an understanding that we have the policy and that we have these 3 priority areas, and that there is this action plan with the benchmarks that they're responsible for. Now, this action plan is something that is shared with you now, but it should already be shared with heads of offices and deputy heads. So the office at the senior management level should already be aware that these are the commitments that OCHA has made corporately, right? And so your job or your responsibility as gender focal points is to help implement. You know, so now that everyone in OCHA should be aware at the country office, I see that, you know, you have a critical role in terms of taking people through that process. Hey, do you have an understanding of what's entailed in the gender action plan? Let's go through it. You know, what does the office need and what resources or support does the office need in order to implement that? Do they need discussions? Do they need to prioritize it at the ICCG? Do they need to table it for discussion, you know, with various partners? Engaging with, you know, the GIHA and others to support implement. So, yeah, so I think, you know, the first point of call is understanding what it means for us as an organization, as an office. And so I think getting everyone on board, because if all OCHA staff understand what the priorities are and in their own work are advocating for those 3 priorities, then that is, you know, the best course of action in terms of implementing the priorities.
Thanks for that,
એ
April.
પાકેલા જ હોય છે કાકી આ બહુ પાકેલા હોય છે.
Oh, can everyone remember to be on mute? And just to highlight, I think also when I say contextualize, what I mean is that thinking about the output, the activities, and the targets that we have in the Gender Action Plan, seeing what that looks like and what that means for your context. It doesn't technically mean to remake the output, remake the activity, but for specifically, if you wanted to look at the advocacy and communications example that I gave about briefings, about advocacy messages, it might be more useful for your advocacy and communication colleagues to name specific kinds of communication materials that they're using in your particular operation, and saying, making sure in the next HC meeting on poverty that we are giving examples on this and this and this. So that might be ways that you can contextualize by making sure that you have these specific events, these specific outputs that are products that they're going to be making, and kind of spelling it out. These are opportunities to make traction on this output. So that's more what I mean by contextualizing, other than creating a different activity. Okay, and I see another hand. Lama, go ahead, Lama.
Hi, everyone. So for the Syria cross-border operation, we just finalized the work on the gender roadmap, which is not an OCHA product. It's a gender action plan for the whole operation, but OCHA is actively engaged in the process under the leadership of the GenCap advisor. She did a great job engaging members from OCHA office from the different units, coordination, IM, humanitarian financing, and we have roles and commitments under the different pillars of the action plan, which is I would say very similar to the OCHA action plan. So my question is, do we need to replicate or create an OCHA specific one, or can we just be part of this this whole momentum and work on the action plan, which is, as I said, it's very detailed. It's so great. And this time we have another component, which is working in the field, actually inside Syria, because previously we were focusing all the time on the central level, the Turkey-based office, but this time we have different activities and milestones to be achieved inside Syria. So do we need to create another one for OCHA? Over.
Yes, let me just clarify, and I think it's great if there is already, you know, a countrywide strategy, roadmap, plan, whatever you call it. We need to be cognizant that these are the priorities that OCHA has set out, and these are our benchmarks. And so whatever strategy that is happening in country, these priorities should be reflected in there, right? These priorities should be aligned, because we certainly don't want to be committing in our own policy that, let's say, you know, we're saying that, you know, women-led organizations, you know, should be at the humanitarian country team or humanitarian decision-making space, right? That's one of our commitments. And then in your roadmap, it says something totally different. Like, that's not going to work. Like, we, in our engagement in these broader processes, need to make sure that our priorities are also informing and reflected, you know, in those strategy developments. And so the second point around whether we need to have two, no, it should be, if we are doing work right, it should be the one plan. So we can be committed to the roadmap, but the roadmap should also speak to our gender action plan. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense, right? And so for me, you know, great that we've signed on to the roadmap, but I think it's important that those people, the GenCap is also cognizant of OCHA's gender action plan, and that the gender action plan benchmarks are reflected in that roadmap. And so if that process hasn't occurred yet, then I would really encourage that there is a revisit and to make sure that it's aligned, because it has to be the one agenda. So, you know, I don't think we need to replicate and have two different, you know, roadmaps, because it should just be that they speak to each other and that it's the shared collective outcome. Does that make sense, Lama?
Yes, very clear, well noted.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Nama. I don't see any other hands at the moment.
I also just want to share here that, you know, we're in discussions with our learning and development unit, because, you know, we have, the gender unit is just Tony and I, really. So, and so we are a little bit under-resourced. So we're working with our learning and development colleagues to come up with a package that speaks to these three priorities. So one of the things that has come up is, you know, people have asked, you know, how do we do better gender analysis? You know, what does it look like for OCHA? Can we have more guidance on this? So, you know, so we are working with our learning and development colleagues to develop a package that is tailored to OCHA. And so we're hoping that that is something that can be completed this year, that we can roll out, you know, with the gender policy and action plan. It's to help give more guidance, you know, to you as well. But in the meantime, of course, we continue to do this. So we've already, you know, had a session with the Niger country office, taking them through, you know, what does gender analysis look like in the context of, you know, OCHA's work, how we can help facilitate and implement at least that first policy. Over to you, Tony.
Yes, April, thank you so much for that. And I also just, before we move on to the next agenda item, just want to highlight that we've also given a session on the gender policy and gender action plan to the new heads of offices and deputy heads of offices. So they are aware of their role and also your role in familiarizing OCHA staff and offices on the gender policy and gender action plan. So just so you know, we're having these conversations in many different spaces, and we hope to ensure that we're facilitating your access and your role in supporting the rollout. Okay. So just moving forward now, our next agenda item is the ISC GAM. So in this item, we wanted to discuss a bit about your experience of utilizing the GAM, what have been some of the challenges, some positive outcomes of the utilization, and any feedback that you can provide to us on how you feel the GAM is as a tool.
And it's also great to have Madhumita here. who is very experienced in facilitating training for the GAM and also encouraging partners to use the GAM. But firstly, just to complement what Tony has introduced, the GAM at the moment, we have refined the questionnaire and is currently being polished and should be ready on a new dashboard soon. So we're just, working on doing that over the next couple of weeks. As you know, the GAM was developed by the GenCap project, but now OCHA has taken over the oversight of that, and that sits with us in the gender unit right now. And so we're working with our APMB colleagues to help with the data analysis, having a much more easier, accessible dashboard and questionnaire. But we also have a longer term strategy. So right now, the short-term strategy is to finish that dashboard, make sure that it's accessible and people can use it. And then the second point, which is related to this discussion, is to look at, is there a way that we can improve, the GAM? Is it meeting, is it serving its purpose? What are some of its limitations? What is it that we really need? And how can we, what would be the best way to address that? And so this is, we wanted to have this conversation because we've had lots of different concerns raised. We've had lots of queries about the use of the GAM. Can it be used to track funding? Can it, a whole variety of questions. And so we wanted to use this opportunity to ask you, what has been your experience, you and partners in using the GAM, and if there were opportunities to improve it, what would you recommend? What would you do? And of course, this is not the end of the conversation. We just wanted to start the conversation here to give you the opportunity. You're always most welcome to have further bilaterals with us. Also to, put your concerns or suggestions in writing. But we just wanted to at least have this forum dedicated to opening that dialogue about the GAM and its utility. So over to you.
There was a hand, disappeared.
I raised my hand. Do you see me?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It was your hand that disappeared. Go ahead, please.
Okay. No, thanks, Tony. Thanks, April. So it's Amel, GenCab in Ethiopia, recently arrived. So the biggest question I repeatedly received is the fact that, in fact, the assumption underlining the GAM is that people actually are interested to integrate gender equality. However, they just don't know how to do it. And that implies like, okay, the idea behind it, now GAM is used as a self-learning tool. That justify why repeatedly the message sent to all partners that GAM is a self-learning tool. However, people like humanitarian funds management, but also gender networks or gender working groups are also questioning the aspect of accountability. So is the assumption valid across the board? All partners are interested in gender equality. It's just that they don't know how to do it. And that would also raise the question about, okay, what if people use this to their own advantage in terms of like just making, putting together some numbers or some figures and some facts, because nobody is actually really checking. So I'm not sure like if this is something that need to be raised at this point, but it's just an issue that's coming all over again. Over.
We'll hear from some of the others and then we can respond. Very interested. Marmita.
Well, I think the biggest problem with the GAM is the accuracy. how accurate you are in scoring, because people think that if I get a 3 or a 4, it's a tick box thing and I automatically am able to, my project is going to be considered. So I do think that's a huge problem. And often the needs assessments are not really adequate to write up a good project. So I think every country office, when they come up with need assessments, it must be very, very clear that sector-wise or cluster-wise need assessments are disaggregated, has a thorough gender analysis. So when the projects are designed, they're able to use that information to design their projects and not wait for doing something later. And secondly, another very important aspect that we really need to focus on is that GAM is not just for design or designing a project and submitting it. But once your project is approved, you need to monitor it using it, because we need to have monitoring reports that are able to tell us what difference we have made, what transformation have we made, because none of our reports are really talking about transformation. It does not have a good gender analysis. It only talks about numbers reached. So I think this is something that we really need to work on.
Rania, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. From my side, I would like to say that as I see and from experience, from dealing with partners, the GAM has created a new layer of bureaucracy. Unfortunately, it does not provide solutions. In the former GM that we used to do, the gender marker, the old one, we used to provide recommendations and solutions to the partners when we review their project proposals. Those solutions, those recommendations are tailored for this specific project proposal. It's not like general guidance speaking from the outer space. No, practical solutions to a specific project proposal. And most of the time, for our partners, is just like filling in the spaces to get rid of it, get the score, and continue the process. People who fill in the gender marker, the GAM, are not experienced in gender. It's just like they have to do this administrative duty. So from my side, and since day one, I saw this. And sorry, I'm frustrated with the GAM. So it doesn't provide solutions. And the change is not in the statistics. The change should be in the benefit and service on the ground that women really can feel. It's tangible. And as Madamita said, all the questions are about the numbers. We all know that gender mainstreaming, it's not about the numbers. You can find a project with dozens of women benefiting from it, but it's very weak when it comes to examining it from a gender lens. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Anya.
Any other points? But certainly, totally hear you, Rania, Amel, and Madhumita on some of the challenges with the GAM. Now, certainly the intention was there to improve on the first gender marker, to make this, more robust. But I think in the process, you're right, Rania, that it has become a little bit cumbersome and bureaucratic. And because it is a self-directed, self-assessed tool, it means that it doesn't require anyone else to vet or to review to see, where things can improve. And there are pros and cons to that. I think with the original gender marker, a lot of GenCap advisors and gender experts were using a lot of their time reviewing projects. And they just found that, they were doing so much work. But at the same time, as you say, Rania, it also helped because in reviewing those, you can make suggestions to the project designers about where they can improve with their programming. And so there was a level of engagement. Whereas with the GAM, because it's so self-directed, there isn't that engagement. So, you could be a program designer putting in like whatever information you think is accurate in order to get the 3 or the 4. And, we wouldn't know otherwise if that's the case or not. So I do think that that is one of the challenges. On the accuracy, yes, still an issue. And this accountability. So I think they're all kind of related. How accountable is it? How good is it at measuring gender equality if it is only self-assessed? So I don't have an answer, but I do take on these issues as we move forward with developing some, or if we are looking to redesign, what would it look like? Julia, I see your hand up as well.
Oh, you're on mute, Julia. Oh, there you go.
Good afternoon and good morning to those who are still in the time zone where it is still morning. Just a few cents from my side. We have in Ukraine, so I'm a humanitarian advisor with OCHA Ukraine and the Gender Focal Point. In Ukraine, we have been with the huge help of Madhu, who has been our Gen Cap at the very onset. We have been championing in promoting gender with age marker, and Ukraine has been one of the first countries that applied a gender with age marker in its full scale. We also have been showcasing and promoting gender with age marker in the monitoring phase back when there was a dedicated team in Geneva. Right. I would say that I'm not that negative about gender with age markers. Some colleagues may sound, but with a little caveat. Indeed, we do experience sometimes that colleagues, partners, and counterparts may perceive gender with age marker as ticking the box practice. However, with the time flow, and it seems that it has been already the 4th year, the perception of this tool has changed, slightly changed. Certainly we are always highlighting that that's a self-reflective tool, and this is something to trigger the right questions to your answers. But I agree that that's rather a very comprehensive process. And if you ask me, we should start with dealing with cluster colleagues. And in our AAP efforts, for instance, we are promoting incorporating gender aspect into cluster specific assessments. And that is something that is like the first milestone that would ensure that all the partners of this cluster would have credible and evidence-based data to rely on. Because when we are talking about figures, indeed, we also encounter many cases when we have just simple figures without very robust gender analysis in it. But I would say that we kept, even despite all the recommendations coming from headquarters, we kept kind of we are not calling it vetting process, we're calling it recommendations. We so under the auspices of OCHA, we convene so to say a small committee. Usually it comprises of several UN gender focal points, GBV cluster coordinator, for instance, and I try to make it more balanced with UN and NGOs partners to be there. Not many people, like up to 6 people, who would be going through the GAM score and looking through the project proposals. It's not for the sake of checking or being the watch guards, right? But just for the sake of not having just simple figures without any gender analysis in it. And what we call it, we provide recommendations to enhance the project proposal. This has been done for a number of years, and I would say it works. Certainly, it adds up to the work of myself, for instance, because usually when you provide recommendations and you say that you have there is a lack of gender analysis as such, you just provide some simple fact that does not have anything to do with gender analysis. Partners would usually ask and would seek your advice, and you would have to facilitate a bilateral discussion. You would need to give them particular examples, how to do that, in what way they may improve their project proposal, and give them very, very concrete examples. It does not happen much. I would say like up to 10 consultations, either in a teleconference or just having this ping pong emails, right? But it happens, and I would say that it helps a lot because the overall quality of project proposal has been improving throughout the years. And this year, Ukraine is shifting to the activity-based costing, and it would even give more flexibility because we wouldn't be having that tight deadlines in terms of submitting project proposals, and there would be no cluster vetting process, which kinds of very worrisome for me personally, because usually clusters would sit through some very badly evidenced projects, right? We'll see how it goes this way, but what I'm concerned about is that we're going to have a bunch of projects, and sometimes a percentage of people who have very limited understanding of what is GAM, because with staff rotation, the crisis is not new, but with staff rotation, you keep improving the awareness with regards to GAM, but it anyway needs to be improved on a rolling basis. So from Ukraine perspective, we are happy with it, but again, I will reiterate my earlier point that I made, it seems last year, saying that it would be critical to have support from the headquarters and the donor community, because once you impose some kind of importance from the donor perspective that GAM is something not just ticking the box, and that the donors themselves have this as a priority, then that would give a bit more weight for the partners just to have the resources by implementing, by applying the gender with age marker with substance behind it, right? So
Okay,
this is
so much, Julia.
this is something.
Yeah, thanks for your point.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone for just a great discussion on the GAM, and I think we're going to take all of these points to heart in how we move forward in developing a tool that is better for us to be able to utilize and really be able to promote and engage, especially when it comes to the design and monitoring aspect. We really don't want this tool to be seen as a tick the box exercise. That's not what it's intended for, but to be useful in ensuring that we are supporting a robust gender analysis in humanitarian projects. So we'll give you more updates on how that's turning out as we go along. So just as we're winding down and getting to the end of our meeting today, just quickly, if there's any AOBs before we say our goodbyes.
But I think also any updates from GFPs as well, if there's anything that you want to share with us. I think, you know, we'll reach out again on the piece around mapping gender analysis. I forgot to mention this when I was doing my introduction, but we are at the global level trying to map which operations and which partners or entities are conducting gender analysis so that we can have a consolidated list to share with our officers, so that we can have information to inform the development of the HPC 2022. So all of this prep work, we certainly count on your support to tell us if there are gender analysis that is being planned by the various partners in your operation.
Bunkana, go ahead. I see your hand.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you well.
Okay, so this is Bunkana from OCHA. I just share with you maybe 2 points. A very, I think, interesting initiative from the logistic. I say that there is really not a lot of people working, a lot of women working on the logistics sectors. And many of them in these sectors are doing maybe administrative things than other things in this cluster. So they approach us and they ask if we can do things together with the gender working group. So we are planning to do a survey, not only to know how many women are working in the logistics sector here, but also to understand at the managerial perspective what is being done to be sure that they can also have access to this. So this is we are working on the questionnaire. Maybe we will ask your point of view on it, but they want to do that very shortly so that they can also advocate on this, and they have really good ideas. Going to schools and checking if women have access to those logistics schools, and doing we say a portes ouvertes in French, but I don't know how to say it in English, but something like to show and explain the work of the logistic to people, and be sure that we can have more opportunity for women and girls in these sectors. The last point will be maybe regarding the HPC. I think we shared this information with April earlier, but we are the gender working group has been working with the assessment working group to be sure that indicators in the multisectorial need assessment for the HPC will take into account the gender perspective. And also today we had our gender working group meeting, and we are going to participate to the joint analysis process for the HNO, which will be in September. So just those information to share with you. Thank you.
Great, Bunkana, thank you so much. I see another hand from Billy. Billy, go ahead.
Thanks, Tony. I never speak at these meetings. My colleague Lena is usually the focal point, so I thought I would share some updates from our side in Afghanistan. Some of the issues that we are facing at the moment is seeing a regression of gender rights and protective environments for women and girls, particularly as conflict escalates. We see a change in hand in districts, right? So all of the work, the normative work that has been done is still continuing. There's, we do have a lot of efforts that we've put in starting from 2019 to include gender as a cross-cutting priority for the HCT decisions, gender in the HNO and HRP. We have a gender and humanitarian action working group. We have gender-specific analysis. We're trying to improve on that more and more, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the systemic type of work from our side on the humanitarian sector, I think, is being done, but what's being undone is what happened in the last 20 years, which is a feat on gender rights. And something that we're trying to work with the group right now is to try to have real-time analysis of what's happening. And we're trying to message up to headquarters through our headquarters colleagues, through humanitarian leadership engagement with donors in country abroad, with security, with the U.S. Donor security councils or national security councils and so on and so forth. Now, I just want to say that, despite some feats that may be achieved on the normative side, there could be, the unbuckling of the realities on the ground. And something that we are facing right now is just that. And since you asked for us to share some things, I thought I would share my piece. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Billy, for that. I think it's really important that, especially when we're talking about gender equality, and we're usually having these conversations about normative access and engagement and our gender frameworks, that we're also thinking about how all of these things are married to gender and women's rights, and how that also is the space in the work that we're doing. And so it's very important to hear these kind of updates that you're saying is happening in Afghanistan today.
Gada had hand up. Tony.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. Gada, do you have your hand up? Please go ahead.
Thank you, April and Tony. Actually, in terms of gender analysis or assessment, in Sudan, we were now having or planning for the multi-sectoral need assessment. It's not like a gender focus, but we're part of the need assessment group, and we're like with other agencies. The IOM is leading on this. We're trying also to strengthen the questions and hoping that we related to gender, and we're hoping that maybe some good quality information are available for this HPC cycle, because we're looking to have this assessment completed and have the data available by end of September. So yeah, and I acknowledge the support from your side. We'll be reaching out to you for help in articulating some of these issues in our document. We have all intention to have a good HRB gender perspective document. Thank you for both of you. Over to you.
Excellent, Gada. Thank you so much. I was just reflecting on all the comments from the colleagues. That all of the things that you're sharing is actually part of implementing our gender action plan, right? The Afghanistan, looking at real-time analysis, and the impact on gender. If we can showcase that OCHA is taking a role in highlighting these issues, in profiling them in some way for the humanitarian community to inform their policy and advocacy and programming, that I think that's our first priority that we're implementing. And then the same with you, what you just shared, Gada. That you're implementing the gender action plan with regard to making the HPC more gender responsive, and to make sure that gender analysis is included in there much more robustly this time. And and I think Bonkana, when you were talking about working with the logistics sector, I was thinking that is our priority 3, which is around, how do we support women in decision making and women's participation. And so, collaborating with logistics is one way, right, of improving or increasing women's participation in that sector. And then that, of course, then will inform the decision making. So I think, we're all on the right track in terms of implementing the policy. So I would really invite you to think about some of these things when we come to reporting, because we are doing it already. And so please share some of these examples, keep sharing with us so that we can keep some documentation on it to make it easier when it comes to reporting what we've done. Because sometimes, when we share this action plan, people get a little bit overwhelmed, like, what can I do? I need to have another work plan. Just, hold on and reflect on all the things that you're collaborating and doing already, because I think we are already implementing. So it's fantastic to hear. And great to have like our GenCap colleagues, join this call, who are, supporting us in rolling out this plan as well. There are no other hands, right? So I'm sorry that we've gone a little bit over. So perhaps we'll conclude the meeting this time. And we will share some of the readouts and any relevant materials with you. But in the meantime, please keep sharing and sending us stuff, because it's really helpful to inform the talking points that we do, the analysis that we give, the advocacy messaging, and to also give your operations visibility. So all the examples that Tony shared, it's because you have shared them with us, so we didn't have to go and physically ask. So if you share, then it means that you get more visibility, and it means that we have more examples for management when they ask us, what's happening with the integration of gender in our operations. So thank you so much for attending the meeting today. I think the discussion has been really rich, and we'll continue this discussion on how we can better support you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Likewise.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Stay safe.
Bye.